Guess what, everybody? We got the duo back together. It's Damichael Cole here with Joe Mullinax. And one of the trendiest things going on right now is NBA 2K23. You know, the NBA players love it. We love to talk about it. The game is coming out on Friday, and some of the Grizzlies players just got their ratings. We're going to talk about where 2K ranks Grizzlies players, and there are some interesting notes in there. So let's talk about it coming up on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen every single day, however you get podcasts, however you check things out on YouTube, if you watch us there, if you're listening on anywhere that you can get a podcast. We appreciate being your first listen here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host. We're back together, as he alluded to, Mr. Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. Damichael, how are you doing?
Joe, I'm great, man. College football started back this past week.
Sure did.
Then we get some NFL football coming soon. And I always tell everyone, I think there are some great months throughout the year. You know, you can make an argument for maybe, January. You can make an argument for maybe April, March, because of March Madness and draft and all those things. But for my money, Joe, October. We're getting close to October. Best sports month there is. You're going to have the NBA taking off. You're going to have the second week of, NFL. You're going to have college sports. You're going to have college basketball on the way back. I mean, it doesn't get better. And then, of course, you get the MLB playoffs. And as a Braves fan, I know MLB playoffs don't sound as enticing to you right now as a Nats fan, but I'm looking forward to it over here. But that means you just get one step closer to Grizzlies basketball.
It could be worse. I could have traded half of my farm system for a player who is not living up to expectations. I love Juan Soto. Come home, Juan Soto. It's because you're in San Diego and it just looks weird. That's why you're struggling. Just come back to us when free agency hits. But anyway, this is Locked On Grizzlies. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as I mentioned. And today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Damichael, I've heard you talk about in the past your personal game as a basketball player. And maybe one of these days we'll get the opportunity to play alongside of each other, maybe even a little one-on-one, see who has the real skill on the court. But obviously one of the cool things that we most certainly could do, even though there's distance between us, is we could get on the sticks, right? We could get on Xbox, we could get on PS5 or 4, whatever system you got. NBA 2K is coming out this coming Friday, and it is the season for the rankings and players to be offended by them, players to act like they don't care when they really do. I appreciate the honesty, to be honest with you, Michael, when they come out and say, and I know we'll talk about this later, I should have been rated higher. How am I not this? Why is this my archetype? Whatever the case might be, it's really cool when they actually are just honest about their frustration, because everybody feels that way. Like, think about if there was a Locked On Network game and they came out with the Locked On Grizzlies rating, and of course it would be a 99 overall. Right? Like, obviously. But imagine if, like, my handsomeness score would be something low, like a 28, and I would be like, whoa. Come on now. A 28? I'm better looking than that. Right? So I think that we all can empathize with an NBA player, even though they're millionaires and they play a kid's game. To come out in a video game and have somebody rank you, I mean, naturally there's going to be some feelings about that.
Yeah. It's a big deal, and I know a lot of fans who are actually probably going to tune in to this and could care less about 2K. So for you, bear with us.
Sorry,
this whether you want to believe it or not, the 2K ratings is going to have a lot of about from an actual basketball perspective of the NBA in this episode. So there is some relevance here as we'll get into it. But 2K is such a big deal as a kid who's growing up. I'm 25 now. I grew up playing 2K3, 2K4, 2K5, 2K7 with Shaq on the cover with the Miami Heat. all the way up. NBA Live and 2K were kind of back and forth for a while, and then 2K10, 11 came, and when the Miami Heat Big Three came together, it felt like 2K just went to an entirely different level. And ever since then, I mean, the game has added so much more to it, and these players play it. I talked to Grizzlies players, about playing 2K. When I was in Philadelphia covering the Sixers at the Philadelphia Inquirer, we talked to Sixers players playing 2K as well. It is a thing, and you're right on the money, Joe. These guys, they see those ratings and they feel like, oh, I'm a great shooter. And you see your 3-point shooting is 75, which is basically around average on a 2K rating scale. They're gonna say, I don't shoot the ball average and things like that. But the thing about it is, it's almost a credit to 2K. 2K has become so accurate in a way with just these prototypes, creating these players. It already looks real. It's a big deal.
It's impressive how they've advanced the graphics. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, Damichael.
Oh,
the first video game for the NBA that I remember playing was NBA Live 96 on the Sega Genesis. Oh. And I remember playing as the Chicago Bulls because I was 9 years old at the time, what kid growing up in the mid-90s didn't want to be a Bulls fan and cheer for Michael Jordan? But now that I'm an adult, I understand it better. When I was a kid, I never understood why Michael Jordan was never actually in the game. Like the Chicago Bulls had a number 23, but he wasn't Michael Jordan, right? Like it didn't have the name Michael Jordan. It was because of all the licensing stuff that as a child I didn't get. Obviously, that's not as much of a problem for the NBA now. There's plenty of money to be made in the massive market that is video games. And the Memphis Grizzlies, you alluded to the fact that this is a Memphis Grizzlies podcast, so we probably need to bring it back home with that. I have the ratings here in front of me. Shout out to Grind City Media, at Grind City Media on Twitter, for posting these. Obviously, there's lots of different levels to this, and this is not a video game podcast, so we can't go too in-depth with the graphics, all those things. You guys just have to buy the game and play it for yourself this coming Friday when it's released. For me, Damichael, looking at these numbers, you start with John Morant, because when you talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, you naturally start with John Morant. Being rated as a 93 overall. I believe that's the 9th or 10th best player in the entire game.
Player in the NBA. Yep.
9th best player in the NBA by those overalls. I think Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Bucks, understandably, is the highest ranked player at 97 overall. But I talked about it on yesterday's episode. The signature shoe, that news that broke, or reports that broke, is probably the more fair way to put that. While we were away, how that's just further evidence of John Morant being a superstar. This is another, notch in the old belt. So this is another insert random cliche here for John Morant being one of the very best players in the National Basketball Association. And he is a remarkable talent. It's really cool to see not just Memphis acknowledge that and support it and love it, but the grand NBA audience do the same thing.
Yeah. And, John Morant, you start with him as a 93 on this game. And I think, even for him, that's a big jump up. You mentioned puts him at 9th in the NBA in terms of player ratings. And he was ahead of some really good players. We're talking about ahead of Damian Lillard. We're talking about ahead of, Devin Booker. It's a lofty, praise for Ja entering his 4th season, even though of the Grizzlies players, Ja's the one who doesn't play 2K as much as the other guys. So you usually see Ja respond to a lot of things. He probably won't respond to a 2K rating as much, but a lot of the other guys, just to go through some of the rankings that we saw in here, you had Jaren Jackson as an 83, Desmond Baine as an 83 overall, Steven Adams, 82. I believe Dylan Brooks was at an 80, and then Tyus Jones was at an 80, and then you had Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, Brandon Clark at 78, Xavier Tillman, 76, John Conchar as a 75, Zire Williams as a 74, and then you had Danny Green as a 73. And actually, another thing, Joe, when I posted these overall on Twitter, a couple Grizzlies fans commented and said, what's DeAnthony Melton's rate? What's Kyle Anderson's rating? And then some people responded and said, oh, they don't play with the Grizzlies anymore. But then it registered why they asked that. you saw when I went down the ladder of those guys, Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, John Conchar, all in that 80 to 75 range. DeAnthony Melton, 80 rating on 2K. Kyle Anderson, 78 rating on 2K. So in a way, according to 2K, Joe, the Grizzlies just lost two of their top bench players. That's what 2K thinks. And we've talked about that. But yeah, we're going to talk more as well about these overall ratings, and we're going to get into some of our observations, Joe.
In 2K and in real life, they lost two of their better, at least regular season players. But as we've discussed and will continue to, these ratings change, right? Like that's one of the cool things about technology. They weren't sending the internet to my Sega Genesis back in the day and updating the rosters. I have a feeling those ratings will look pretty different for the Grizzlies 2 months from now as opposed to how they are now. But that is something that we can discuss more in depth as we continue on with the show. But before I move on, I don't know, Damichael, if you have tried the Built Bar Puffs yet. If you haven't, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And you know what? This is crazy. There's a new flavor. There's a new flavor of these amazing puffs from Built Bar. It is delicious, indulgent cookie dough. It is covered in chocolate. It's amazing. Built has done it again. Cookie dough chunk puffs that are only 160 calories. They have a whopping 15 grams of sustaining protein in them. You're going to love these new cookie dough chunk puffs. Whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat like I'm going to need after I record this podcast, or you just need to get a quick bite to eat, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than candy. Ditch the calories, ditch the fat, ditch all those extra sugars, and grab yourself a Built bar. And we have a remarkable offer going for you right now. You can go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKEDON15. That's LOCKEDON15, and get 15% off of your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON15. Damichael, you mentioned the idea of John Morant and the overall ratings, DeAnthony Melton and Kyle Anderson, obviously no longer with the team, being rated higher than some of these guys. That is not that surprising to me. But what is surprising to me, I'll give you one of mine, and then I'm kind of curious as to what you may be surprised by. When you look at the three-point shooting ratings, John Morant is a rated higher three-point threat than Jaren Jackson Jr. Maybe that shouldn't surprise me. You know, we've talked briefly on here, and I'm sure as the season gets closer when we're previewing players and things of that nature, the idea of Jaren Jackson Jr. as a three-point threat is maybe larger than the reality of Jaren Jackson Jr. as a three-point threat at this point. But it really stood out to me that John Morant, currently going into the season, according to NBA 2K, is more of a three-point shooting threat than Jaren Jackson Jr. How much of that to you, Damichael, is the reality of the situation? How much of it is maybe 2K not paying as much attention as they should? Because, again, Ja had a much better season shooting from three than he had previously. But when you think of three-point shooting, you don't necessarily think of Morant as much as you do Jaren.
Yeah, and I think that's a credit to me personally. I think that's 2K doing their homework, Joe.
Right.
I think because in the past, there have been times where people criticize 2K for saying, oh, they just went with, the general, ideas on players where they would have not even thought of Morant as, a high-ranking three-point shooter. But if you go through the stats kind of back this up in recent time. I know Jaren Jackson Jr., when he came in the NBA, and it was like, man, he shot, 35.9% as a rookie, and then he comes in his second year, and he shoots 39%, over 2 makes per game. But, since then, talk about 28% in the few games he played, his third season, fourth season with this year. I mean, you had Grizzlies fans saying to me, look, he needs to stop shooting as much. He shot 31.9% and shot over 5 3-point attempts per game. So he had his high moments like he did in that series against Golden State. I believe that was game 1.
Yeah.
And he also had his low moments where it's like, please, Jaren, you're 6'10", 6'11", put the ball on the floor, use your size. But I think as of right now, as of coming off of the season, how things went, it's an accurate, perception. You can make an argument that Jaren Jackson Jr. does take much more difficult shots, the transition threes and things like that. Meanwhile, John Morant usually takes a lot more set shots. I think there's a strong argument that can be made for that as well. So I think, 2K didn't miss the mark on that one. One thing that I think they missed the mark on, and I know John Conchar is, he's a fan favorite, fan favorite around here. So this is no disrespect to John Conchar at all. But as I just mentioned, John Conchar received a 75 overall rating. For one, 2K ranks him as a shooter. Okay, they saw the numbers. They saw him shooting 40% from three-point range.
Must have ignored the usage.
Must have completely ignored the usage because this guy, Joe, this guy is we saw him get an 18 rebound game. We saw him have a 15 rebound game. He's a rebounding wing through and through. That's what he should have been listed at instead of a shooter. And I think that also played a role in him being ranked higher than Zire Williams. Zire Williams is a 74 overall.
Sure.
John Conchar is a 75. Joe, I think they missed the mark on that one.
I think Zire Williams is going to be one of those that in that first roster update is in front of John Conchar. I agree with you. I think they ignored usage. And I think that when you look at Zire, another surprising thing about Zire, you mentioned how 2K did their homework with regard to Jaren and John. That might be true. Zire is listed positionally by NBA 2K as a small forward, power forward. Now at 6'9", again, you think of Kyle Anderson going back to the previous segment, and you think, 6'9" dudes are usually those combo forwards. But if you watch Zire Williams play, obviously you watch him a ton over there at the Commercial Appeal as a former site manager of the for the Memphis Grizzlies blog on SB Nation, Grizzly Bear Blues. I've watched a lot of Grizzlies basketball. Obviously, in my new role here on Locked On, I'm going to be watching a lot of Grizzlies basketball. He ain't a 4. Right? If he's a combo anything, he's a combo wing. He's a combo 2 and 3, leaning to the side of point guard. I mean, the Grizzlies in Summer League put the ball in his hands, much like they did with Desmond Baine in the previous Summer League. So he is much more perimeter-based. Yes, he plays off the dribble, and yes, he likes the mid-range shot. But he's not somebody that you look at and say, he's going to go get me a bucket on the block, or he's going to go and take somebody off the dribble with his back to the basket. He is definitely more perimeter-based. I was kind of surprised that they had his secondary position as a power forward and not a shooting guard. If anything, Conchar plays more like a power forward than Zire Williams does.
Yeah, that's where, they kind of missed the mark. And honestly, I understand why people missed the mark on Zire Williams because we here in Memphis got a completely different view of it.
It's true.
Most of the time, what 2K is doing probably, and this is just my opinion, I'm not, inferring anything. I would assume that they're pretty much looking at your body of work over the course of a full season.
Right.
And even though his full season numbers kind of mellowed out and ended up being, I thought, pretty decent for a rookie season, Zire Williams, that is, from February on, that dude was good. So he was legitimately good. And 2K didn't. I'm sure they didn't think, let's see what Zire Williams' numbers were from February on. No, they factored in the time at the beginning of the season when a lot of people thought, Zach Kleiman missed on this pick.
Well, I didn't think that, but I thought it was confirmed because, in fairness to Zach Kleiman, he said he was a project all along.
Yeah,
and it was just statistically accurate that he was one of the worst rotational players in the entire NBA.
And then it flipped, right? He said, he had a lot of time, due to the injury, due to just sitting on the bench a lot to take those mental reps, soak up knowledge behind those guys. And February on, really, he went to a whole nother level. And I think we saw that continue in Summer League. I recently wrote the story. You can check it out as well on commercialappeal.com about his mid-range shooting. And what surprised me more than anything is 2-point field goal percentage on the Grizzlies. We all know Brandon Clark was number 1, right? It's a given. I mean, he just had one of the highest field goal percentage shooting seasons in franchise history.
Right.
Number 2 was Zire Williams. And I'm talking above Steven Adams.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking above Ja Morant as a 2-point shooter. And we know Ja Morant isn't taking mid-range jumpers. So this is above basically Ja Morant's floaters and finishing around the rim. We're talking above Tyus Jones. We're talking above, Desmond Baine. The list goes on. he was clearly there was a gap, Joe. There was a gap. 2K's not factoring that in. There's a lot they have to learn, and it's because of his mid-range jumper. It's because of all those alley-oops he was catching and running the floor.
Sure.
Zire Williams, I'm with you. I think he's the type of guy. Right now, he's listed at a 74. I'd be willing to bet he could end up there near Brandon Clark as like a 78 when the season, gets to probably December or January.
I agree with Damichael on basically everything he just said. I also agree with something that Damichael said earlier about how John Morant's not going to go out and tweet about NBA 2K ratings. That's not really his thing. He'll tweet about other lines of shade. He doesn't seem to be much of a gamer. There are other NBA players, however, that very much are gamers and are very aware of what their ratings are. We'll talk about that briefly on an NBA scale in the next segment, as well as what Memphis Grizzlies players should be frustrated by their ratings, maybe petition NBA 2K for a higher number. We'll get to that in the next segment coming out of the break. Damichael, we're back, and we're talking about NBA 2K coming out on Friday, NBA 2K23. Everybody's excited. It shows that even more than just a video game, the season is coming, right? I think, folks, it's one of those early signs that it's going to be NBA season soon, and it gets the juices flowing. It gets people fired up. One of the things that fired me up when I looked at these ratings, Damichael, in terms of percentages, right, what they're rated as in terms of being a good player, something that a Grizzlies player should go and complain about. Because like Klay Thompson complained about what he has to do to be like the top 3-point shooter. Kevin Durant said, what do I got to do to be a 99 in the game? There's multiple players that had grievances a la Seinfeld with the ratings of NBA 2K. I'm going to file a grievance for my boy, and I'm claiming him as mine, Desmond Baine. Desmond Baine is listed as an 86 overall 3-point shooter. I believe that puts him at 12th in the game in terms of being a 3-point shooter. Really, NBA 2K23? You're going to have Desmond Baine, who was one of the most elite shooters in the entire league last season, be behind Luke Kennard? Really, NBA 2K? I'm filing a grievance with that. If you put Desmond Baine in front of a group of people that are familiar with the NBA, and you have him standing next to Luke Kennard, and you look at those two dudes, and you say, look at their numbers, look at how they play the game, who is a better 3-point shooter? I don't care what the percentages say. It's Desmond Baine. In the entire NBA, in my opinion, there are two guys that should have better 3-point percentages or 3-point ratings than Desmond Baine. Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. That's it. Desmond Baine should be number 3. I think it's ridiculous. Desmond, if you're listening, I will file the grievance for you if you want me to. Just say the word, and I will happily do it.
And Joe, I think you're actually right. I think
yes.
2K actually did have Desmond Baine as one of the top guys. I saw earlier that he was the 3rd ranked 3-point shooter.
Oh, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought he was 12th.
I think you're probably referring to the 2K22 update. But he is ranked 3rd. So everyone tell Joe, you calm down.
I need to get my information straight, but I was very angry.
No, yeah. Just take a deep breath, because I would have been right with you if that was the case. But all in all, he got an 88 overall, and I kind of still side with you a little bit here, because 88 is second in NBA. It's tied with Klay Thompson. But as you mentioned, Klay Thompson was kind of on the side of he felt that his should be higher.
And when you look at the 3-point ratings, I have them pulled up in front of me now. I apologize for my angry rant. I had incorrect information. Bane at 88, tied with Klay Thompson. Steph Curry is a 99. Like, Steph Curry is an amazing 3-point shooter, but Klay Thompson is closer to Steph Curry than 11-point drop. Right? Yeah.
And that exact thing stood out to me as well. I think Desmond Baine should break 90. We're talking about a guy that shot over 43%. For one, Desmond Baine, and I said this a lot of times throughout the season on Locked On Grizzlies. When I went to All-Star Weekend in Cleveland, Joe, I asked every rising star guy up there, what do you know about Desmond Baine? What do you know about Desmond Baine? And a lot of the guys said the same thing. When we play the Grizzlies, That's the shooter. And the way I took that is, it's funny because everyone knows, Joe, everyone knows when you play the Grizzlies, who's going to shoot the three-pointers. Right. You see it sitting courtside. I hear it all the time. They're yelling when he has the ball, shooter. They're yelling when he comes off the screen, shooter, shooter. And he still shoots at this clip. It's not like he's benefiting just, Morant drives to the paint and he gets 10 wide open three-pointers per game. No, he's having to pump fake. We know the one dribble pump fake. His
flyby.
The flyby, there it is. And then the pull-up three-pointer was one of the best. He had to really deepen his bag. I think he deserves to break 90. I think Klay Thompson deserves to break 90 as well. But in reference to our guy, Desmond Baine, Joe, I think they kind of sold him a little bit short. But Morant, on the other end, was rated as a 97 as a dunker. I believe that was the highest in the league among dunkers. So he cleared Zire Williamson as a 97 on the dunk scale. So what do you think about that? Is Morant the best dunker in NBA, Joe?
Absolutely. Like, why is that even a question? Why is that something that would be controversial? I mean, Zion is amazing, and Zion deserves praise and probably a higher dunk rating. But in terms of in-game dunks, what are we talking about? Morant is not even close to any being in the same realm with anybody else right now, at least not until I see it in game. Again, in a dunk contest, tip your cap to Aaron Gordon, Zach LaVine, all these guys that do a remarkable job within that parameter, within those parameters of a competition. But Morant in game is one of the best dunkers I've ever seen in my life, not just in terms of being physically able to do it, but the audacity of this dude. He will go and fly and fight gravity itself. If gravity had a face, he would punch it square in the nose.
7-foot Jakob Poeltl with no regard for his life.
With no regard for human life, right? Like, he is just a remarkable athlete. But you pair that, to me, if you're dunking, there's a violence to it, a beautiful violence. But you are physically dominating that particular basketball play. And nobody does that pound for pound. Because, again, Zion has more physical size and strength. Pound for pound, Morant might be the best dunker, I'm not going to say of all time because he's too young for it. But he's going to be in the conversation if he can stay healthy. In terms of, again, he's 6'3", 180, something like that. Probably with bricks in his pocket, soaking wet. He's just explosive, man. He flies through the air. He doesn't even look like he flies at times. It looks like he's floating. He's levitating off the ground. His dunk rating is more than fair.
Yeah, and just to give the Locked On Grizzlies viewers an idea of some of the other numbers out there, Zire Williamson also rated a 97 as a dunker, but then you had Anthony Edwards, you had Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon, all is 95. So 2K thinks Morant is a better dunker than Zach LaVine, Aaron Gordon, and Anthony Edwards. I think that's pretty lofty praise there. There's one more observation I wanted to make just on the Grizzlies side of things, Joe. And this is just a 2K picking hairs thing because once we saw the ratings, and actually there were other people complaining about this too. Desmond Baine and Jaren Jackson Jr. were both rated as 84s, and Steven Adams was like just a notch below at 83. And you had people saying, oh, Desmond Baine is not barely better than Steven Adams, or Jaren Jackson Jr. is not barely better than Steven Adams. And then there were Charlotte Hornets fans I saw comment, oh, Steven Adams has a higher rating than Terry Rozier or Gordon Hayward. Well, let me explain this to you. If you're not a 2K person and you don't understand how these overalls work, it's not directly tied always to who is the better player. Yeah, in simple basketball terms, Terry Rozier is probably a better player than Steven Adams. But with 2K, Joe, if you have an elite skill, that boosts your overall rating. So the way I explain it to Grizzlies fans is Desmond Baine, his elite skill, three-point shooting. Guess what? I can make a easy argument. I don't even have to do too much, Joe. I can make an easy argument for saying just as good as Desmond Baine is as a three-point shooter, Steven Adams is just as good an offensive rebounder and a rebounder in total. He just like Desmond Baine set the three-point record, Steven Adams set the offensive rebounding record this season as well. So
which is impressive considering who has played for the Memphis Grizzlies. Zach Randolph, Jonas Valanciunas.
Exactly.
Steven Adams had that level of play even better than those guys.
Exactly. And that's just one thing I wanted to mention too. When you factor into these ratings, if you have an elite skill, that kind of boosts you up a little bit. And that's why Steven Adams is in that category. No, he's not some, a post-up guy who's going to do these jump hooks or anything, but he's a solid defensive player, overall post-defensive player, and he's an elite rebounder. That helps boost his rating for anyone who is against where Steven Adams is rated on the game. And that's also why I thought Brandon Clark should be higher, but that's where I am at on it, Joe. The game comes out Friday. I can't wait to play it. What you have anything else to add?
I think that you're exactly right about Steven Adams. He proved his value. If you wanted to complain about Steven Adams coming out of New Orleans being, I think he was like an 81 or something like that from remembering from last year's game. If you wanted to complain about that ranking, maybe, he looked pretty washed at times in New Orleans, but he most certainly was not washed for the Grizzlies. He had a career year, you could argue, for Memphis last year, especially as an offensive rebounder, but as a passer, as a screener, there's more to basketball than dunking and shooting threes. And I think that is something that 2K doesn't do terribly with. They do a good job valuing those things. And Steven Adams is massively important to the Grizzlies, not just in the virtual sense, but in the real sense of what he brings to the fold. So I think you're exactly right, Damichael. He's elite in that way. And I think that our listeners, our viewers are elite for checking out Locked On Grizzlies every day. Thank you again for making us your first listen every time that you get on your podcast links, every time you get on YouTube, making us your first listen every day. We appreciate it here at Locked On Grizzlies. Now, for your second listen, you should go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022. This is an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of Locked On Podcast Network giving you previews of teams, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combines into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Damichael, I had so much fun today on this episode. I think we should do it again tomorrow. What do you think?
I'm looking forward to it, Joe. Let's do it. We got to get back into this big rhythm of, the season is almost here. The content is about to start coming more. The Grizzlies in a couple weeks here will be get ready to, get back to practice, and we're going to be off and rolling.
And I think Tom Ziller, and this will be a quick preview of tomorrow's show, I've recorded talking about how Cleveland took a different path from Memphis with the Donovan Mitchell trade. And then Tom Ziller, who's a writer that I respect a good deal, he wrote about that himself in his post this on Tuesday morning. And I tweeted about how it was great minds thinking alike. I'm curious to get your take on the article because, again, it very much gives off Robert Frost, two roads diverged in a wood. The Memphis Grizzlies are taking the one less traveled by. Cleveland's gone all in, and they're not as good as Memphis. The Grizzlies continue on their merry path. So that's a little teaser, as we call it in the business, for one of the things that we'll talk about on our next episode. But until then, for Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer does a phenomenal job covering the Grizzlies for them and for us here at Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax. Very excited to be back with Damichael. We're going to have another great show coming up tomorrow. Until then, talk to you later here on Locked On Grizzlies.